Hello people of YouTube, I'm Anna, aka Articulately Composed. You may know me from my various forms of audio-based fan content that I post on this channel. However, today I want to talk about something I'm a fan of that you may not all know about. Today, I want to talk about Such Pretty Forks in the Road, the new album by Alanis Morissette. Alanis Morissette has been my favorite singer-songwriter from a very young age. I had tons of thoughts about her music and her vocals, and this is the first album she's released in 8 years. AKA the first album she's released since I got my music degree and learned to put words to all the thoughts I have. So, without further ado, let me tell you why I love Such Pretty Forks in the Road, and you should too. I want to go through the album song by song and talk a little about each one, but before we begin that, I want to talk a bit about why this album is so much better than the last couple of releases. Alanis Morissette has, let's call them eras to her sound, and each era is completely dependent on the producer she works with for that album. Her most famous, and arguably her best albums, Jagged Little Pill and Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie, were produced by Glenn Ballard. That's where you get the intense, highly emotional sound that you probably think of when you think of Alanis. Your You Oughta Knows, your All I Really Want's, your Joining You's. The next era, which she produced herself, has Under Rug Swept and So-Called Chaos. They're mellower albums than the first two, but they're full of excellent songwriting that treats her vocals very well. Doth I Protest Too Much from So-Called Chaos is a song that I'd say perfects the formula for consistent, well-written Alanis Morissette song. And then you've got the third era, the Guy Sigsworth era. I'm not gonna lie to you, Flavors of Entanglement and Havoc and Bright Lights are just bad. Her voice is treated so poorly in those songs. Despite Flavors of Entanglement having tons of intense songs with the true potential to be really emotional, the vocals feel flat and expressionless, with all the emphasis being placed on the very formulaic electronic dance instrumentals. And don't get me started on Havoc and Bright Lights. It's the only Alanis Morissette album that I don't own because I can't stand how her vocals are treated. They're sharp and nasally in an incredibly grating way, and the songwriting's pretty middle of the road too. There was a period of time when I thought she might have just lost her touch. Maybe her vocals had aged poorly, but ooh boy was I wrong. Any problems vocal-wise were entirely Guy Sigsworth's fault. And any doubts I had in Alanis' songwriting were completely erased when I saw Jagged Little Pill the musical in 2018 and heard Smiling for the first time. The new producers for Such Pretty Forks in the Road, Alex Hope and Catherine Marks, bring an entirely new, highly dramatic sound to the album, but they don't take away the essence of Alanis' voice and songwriting structure. We start out with a strong one. The melodic contour is absolutely heart-wrenching, and the chord structure really helps to emphasize the lyrics. The song is about Alanis soullessly going through her day-to-day life, keeping up the expectations everyone's come to put upon her. And this is exemplified by the chords primarily alternating between G and C minor, the 1 and the borrowed flat 4. Before each chorus, however, there's a transition from the 1 to the major flat 6. A bright and dramatic shift to jolt you out of the monotony and tell you that this is the anatomy of her crash.
I was just trying to keep it together. This is my fault.
This is the only song on the album that was featured on the Jagged Little Pill musical, which we all know I adore. I was so used to the musical version of this song that when the album version was released, I was a little skeptical of it at first. I felt like it was missing something without the ensemble harmonies and Elizabeth Stanley's dark tone and OxyContin-addled wailing, but honestly, this version's really grown on me. It's a different song with a different context. It doesn't need to have the same orchestration. This is one of the cutest songs ever. It's an ode to her children, and it's just so sweet and full of love. This one reminds me a ton of the songs from So-Called Chaos, especially on the bridge. It's a very simple guitar-heavy tune that really sounds like it's something that could have been made up on the spot when she was playing guitar for her kids at home. My favorite bit is this line in the chorus here.
Your comings and your goings away.
The chords here are minor 6, 5, and 4. While completely diatonic, and a major chord at that, the 4 chord is fantastic at adding just a tinge of melancholy to an otherwise upbeat melody. Also the melisma on away just tugs at your heartstrings a little bit. It almost makes it seem like this snapshot of a loving family is just temporary. Yeah, that. This song is so incredibly catchy. This song about a crippling addiction to alcohol gets lodged in my head all the time. It's just a really fun tune, and I love the jaunty piano. It's such a juxtaposition to the subject matter of the song. The use of piano through this whole album is just really great. From this point on, most of the songs feature piano in one way or another, and it adds a whole new layer to Alanis' previously guitar-centric music. Another thing this song introduces that you'll see in the rest of the album is the use of the secondary dominant. The chorus sounds like this.
Here we are. I feel such rapture, and my comfort is so strong.
The chord on Rapture is a 5 of 6, which essentially means it's a chord with notes outside of the key that give a sort of pull to the 6 chord on Strong. Now, Alanis isn't a complete stranger to the secondary dominant, but it's not a function you see a ton of in her music. Usually when something's outside of the key, it's some sort of borrowed chord. The use of the secondary gives the music a sort of unexpected soulfulness, which I am loving. You want a meaningful song about depression? We got a meaningful song about depression, specifically postpartum depression. The construction of the song is so simple and circuitous, and it fits the subject matter perfectly. The chorus, which is repeated many times, goes, "Call it what you want, 'cause I don't even care anymore. Call it what you need to make yourself comfortable." As if this is something that she's had to repeat a lot herself. Go ahead, give it a label if you want, I've got my own shit to deal with. Harmonically, the chorus revolves around the 1, 4, and 5 chords in the key of D, while the verses seemingly modulate to the minor. But instead of using the major 5 like one would do in the minor key, they use the minor 5, or the minor 3 in the old key, to sort of signify that there's not truly a key departure. One moment I love is this bit here on the chorus.
All of you are so frustrated, and everyone around me is trying to help as much as they can.
The harmonic language here is a circle of fifths progression starting on the minor 3, but it sounds out of place enough in this very simple harmonic structure to really catch your ear. I also adore the use of violins and very subtle vocal harmony to create a build. The song doesn't want an intense build-up with a huge climax. It's incredibly somber, but it still needs a shape, and the violins do an excellent job of giving it one. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably my least favorite song on the album. It's not a terrible song, it's just kind of boring. The tempo dawdles a bit, the tune is pretty predictable, her vocals do sound quite nice in it, but nothing exceptional compared to the other songs. It's not a song that I'm gonna specifically go back to and listen to outside of the album. Kind of boring songs do have a purpose in an album like this though. Sometimes you need a bit of a break when listening through something intensely emotional. Missing the Miracle is the kind of song that gives you the time to sort of zone out and process the song that came before it. Alanis' other albums use this tactic too. Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie, which is my personal favorite of her albums, is an absolute emotional roller coaster. But not every song is incredibly intense. I rarely wake up with the desire to listen to You Are, for example, but I would never skip it when listening to the album all the way through. Because you need that break between the emotional intensity of Can't Not and the lyric deluge of I Was Hoping. Granted, I do think that You Are is a much better constructed song than Missing the Miracle, but they do hold a similar purpose when it comes to album structure. This one has excellent structure. It starts out very fragile, with a lovely piano instrumental that has a very crunchy minor second, and it builds consistently from there. It adds minimal percussion, and then more instruments, and then more ferocious percussion, and builds up right through halfway through the bridge when it gets really quiet and intense.
If I don't stand still, rip my heart out, ambition.
This whole song is honestly super theatrical. I really wonder how many songs on the album were actually written for the Jagged Little Pill musical but got scrapped for time, because there's a few that could fit the bill. Also, the modulation to the minor on the bridge is great. It immediately grabbed my attention. This is the best song on the album. Reckoning gave me emotions that I hadn't felt since I was 15 and listened to Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie for the first time. One of the reasons for this intense emotional response is this bit here. This wailing is absolutely quintessential to Alanis Morissette, and specifically her earlier albums. This one reminds me a lot of the wailing from One. this song really nostalgic and familiar were the real storytelling nature of the lyrics, and also her signature incorrect syllabic stress.
You never knew the scent of the predator.
Most people wouldn't pronounce predator like predator, but Alanis does. Alanis pronounces everything wrong, which is probably why it took me so long to get a hang of proper text setting. When your favorite vocalist growing up does something very wrong, you learn to ignore it in your own work. This is another intensely theatrical song. When Such Pretty Forks in the Road was announced and the tracklist was released, I had wondered why Predator from the Jagged Little Pill musical wasn't on it, if Smiling was. Now I know why. This is Alanis' personal predator. This song is about abuse in the music industry, about a corrupt manager embezzling money, about a small but powerful moment of triumph after years of terror. The song is just really good, and if you don't listen to any of the others, at least try this one. Sandbox Love is another super fun and cute song. Like Ablaze, this one reminds me a lot of So-Called Chaos with the upbeat guitar. It's about rediscovering sexual pleasure with someone trusting for the first time after being hurt and abused by so many men. One thing I want to talk about with this song is the very free use of the fuck word. Obviously, Alanis isn't a stranger to using expletives in her music, but there is a huge tonal shift here. If you think back to You Oughta Know, her use of fuck is so viscerally angry.
And are you thinking of me when you fuck her?
25 years later, and it's taken on a whole new fun and free meaning.
Awkward as fuck. Precious as fuck.
Precious as fuck. Healing as fuck. Awkward as fuck. She's no longer being fucked over by people. She's just allowed to have sex and be free with it. This is another one that I'm not a huge fan of. It's not that it's a poorly constructed song, but it just sounds like a worship song. And that's just not my genre. I get the sentiment of the song, that only female deities can help with a mother's problems, and even then, not fully. And I do like that it continues the juxtaposition of Alanis' Catholic upbringing with her experiences with Hinduism that you have seen throughout her music. But the mention of Hinduism is really only mentioned lyrically. Musically, it sounds like a Christian worship song, in a very simplistic and kind of bland way. This song could have been really interesting if it took the mention of Kali and Shakti and represented them musically. Alanis is not a stranger to Indian influence in her music. It wouldn't have sounded out of the blue at all.
So much of your father, so you were banished and you slide.
What does redeem this song is how absolutely raw the vocals sound. During some of the verses, and especially during the bridge, she sounds genuinely in pain. And I'm not gonna tell you guys I don't love that kind of expression. This is an interesting one. It's a great song, incredibly intense, and I adore the vocals on the pre-chorus. I just have a few questions about the instrumental choices. For one, I wish there was more of a build on the first chorus. The pre-chorus feels like it's setting up something big, and the first word of the chorus is change. But there's no change in the instrumentals. It falls a little flat. I do get that they're doing a slow build up to the climax though, and that build does work very well. I do have to ask though, regarding the climax, why a disco beat? It's not bad, it works with the song, it's just incredibly unexpected. After the second chorus, there's a bit of an instrumental break, featuring some of that signature wailing that I love. But in the middle of the instrumental break, it bursts into a straight up disco beat, complete with the kind of high string ensemble that's common to disco. Interesting departure from the rest of the album, especially for a song about resisting change. This is the only song in the album that gives me a Flavors of Entanglement vibe, probably because of the dark experimental dance feel, but what makes this song better than any of the songs from that album are how her vocals are treated. They aren't disconnected from the instrumental track, they don't feel distant and formulaic, they are incredibly expressive, and that is the signature of a good Alanis Morissette song. Pedestal is the perfect closer for this album. It encapsulates all of the musical flavors of Such Pretty Forks in the Road. Intense instrumentals featuring piano and strings, a dramatic shift on the bridge, a melody with room for chromaticism, and almost bluesy melismas. I adore how the song starts and ends with this line here.
I'm sure you've enjoyed the ride, who wouldn't?
The song is directed at the people who used her name to climb up their own ladder of fame without considering her as a person. But that line feels directed toward the listener. We've all spent the last 45 minutes enjoying the ride of Alanis' descent into postpartum depression, adjusting to family life, recovering from trauma she's received from being in the spotlight and being taken advantage of. We all just got a peek into her personal crisis. One thing that's super apparent with this song, but can be seen throughout the entire album, is that it's written for a darker voice. Alanis Morissette is an incredibly bright-voiced singer. Or at least she was in the past. The sharp and wild tone she had on Jagged Little Pill is iconic. But she's 46 now. She's not going to sound the same as she did when she was 19. Alanis' tone has been darkening for a while now. You can hear the difference in the Jagged Little Pill acoustic album, recorded only a decade after the original. But this is the first new album that's really played toward that darkening, and I think that's fantastic. Partially because they're really good songs, but also partially because there's an entirely new set of Alanis Morissette songs that now I can sing without my vocal tone sounding totally out of place. Such Pretty Forks in the Road is a great album. I'm really glad to see my favorite singer-songwriter back on the scene with fantastic songs after 8 years and 2 mediocre albums before that. I know I compared some of the songs to earlier albums, but believe me when I say this album has its own sound and that sound is great. If you're a fan of Alanis Morissette, or you aren't a fan but you're open to listening to some new music, give it a listen. Also, self-promo time, if you are a fan of Alanis Morissette, I've done quite a few covers of her songs on my channel. Just last month I covered the Lauren Patton Jagged Little Pill musical version of You Oughta Know for a fan parody musical. And I've covered a bunch of songs from both the musical and the original albums. Anyway, thank you all so much for indulging me in this album review. Fun fact, this album is actually why I started doing the Why I Love X and You Should Too video essay series. I got the idea to review it back in March, but I sort of wanted to ease you guys into the idea of theory analysis with a few fandom-adjacent singers. So anyway, huge thanks to my patrons, Ryan Nelson, Stuck at Home Tome, Stinky, and Linsey. And make sure to check out my social media and Discord server in the links below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.